Hi, Jess. Hi, Tommy. How are you guys?
We're doing good.
Well, I'm doing a little better than Jess. I think I've kind of processed some of this football disappointment. Jesse is still in the midst of freaking out, Courtney.
Yeah, I'm in a dark place.
Is there any sort of like Scott Boras-ism that we can use to describe the Bears right now? Because Jess, I saw your quotes yesterday.
Yeah. There
And
probably
I'm
is.
just trying to relate this to to what the Bears are going through, and I don't know if I can find any sort of silver lining for that. Maybe you can help me with that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Watching the Bears is kind of like when I was talking to that knucklehead Yankee fan that opened up Mookie Betts' glove. It's kind of similar, like feeling.
Same level of frustration.
Same level of frustration, right? Boris would come up with a good pun for the Bears. But you know what? I'll get through it. It's just day one of therapy. I've got tomorrow with Waddle. We'll get through it. But more important is the injury report. Of these names that went back at practice, who are you most optimistic about?
I think Montez Sweat being a full participant today is a big sign that it's gonna, he'll play this week. And it's interesting because he told us earlier that the pregame warm-up that he went through, he said it wasn't his decision to not play. So he didn't really get any sort of clear indication about whether he felt he was good to go or not, but literally said that it was Ryan Poles, it was the trainers, like they're the ones who shut him down. So, last week he didn't do much. He had like one day of limited, but he was DNP the 2 other days. So just see him go from limited to full today, that bodes well for his availability. And then Braxton Jones being in a spot where he can practice today. If he gets another day like that in tomorrow, I think it'll be a better sign for him. But he's got a big wrap on his leg right now, and he's going to have to figure out, can you play through it, because they need him. They need him because it was not good last week. Darnell Wright, not likely to play this week either. He was not out there today at practice. He's got reportedly that MCL injury, so I would imagine if they can at least get one of those guys back on the offensive line, they'll be feeling better because they could kick Larry Borum over to right tackle, where maybe he's a little bit more comfortable than he certainly looked playing left tackle last week. But the injuries have been bad. Especially this week in Arizona. I was calling the game for ESPN Radio because we had the national broadcast. I was living by that injury tent. I would just stand there and I'd talk to my producer in my ear, be like, "Hey, I've got something." He's like, "Jesus, can you lay off of it for a little bit? Can you stop with the injury updates?" And it was just from worst to worst last week. And seeing Darnell Wright go out, seeing Andrew Billings, who had surgery today. Montez Sweat said he had just talked to him, and he's now on injured reserve. That's very likely a season-ending one at that too. It's not a good spot for this team to be in, but it's also not going to cut it in terms of excuses for if they look like they did against Arizona, against the Patriots this week.
Courtney joins us on the CarX Tire and Auto Hotline. Courtney is as concerned as I am about them physically. I'm equally concerned with where they are in terms of their mental approach to this. What's the vibe? What and how you're there every day. Do you feel like this group has moved on from a couple of really difficult losses? Or are they still stewing in it?
The Hail Mary one they've moved on from. I know it didn't seem like it last week, and it certainly wasn't, but it's been 2 weeks. So that's got to be so far in the rearview mirror that if you were to bring it up now, that they'd look at you sideways. But it still doesn't excuse the fact that they couldn't score a touchdown last week. They let Arizona run right through them. The team that was the worst on third down defense, held them to 3 of 14. You lick your wounds from that, but now the intensity and the urgency ramps up tenfold because this is probably the last game they're going to be favored in for a while. They're 6.5-point favorites at home against the New England Patriots. Highly doubtful that the line's going to look like that next week when Green Bay comes to town, or when it's Minnesota or Detroit or any of the other division games they're going to have. Certainly San Francisco and the Seahawks in there too. This is about as must-win as it gets. And I know every player is going to tell you the cliche thing of every game's must-win. But 4-5, even for a team right now that's at 500, it doesn't feel like a 500 team because of some of the missed opportunities that you can point to, a number of different factors for why they lost a couple games happening. It's a pressure cooker, and the element of pressure only gets raised if they can't beat another team in front of them that they're just straight up better than in a lot of different areas. I mean, you think the Bears' offensive line is not in a good state. Go look at the one that Drake May's behind this week. If Drake May, for any reason, looks better than Caleb Williams, more comfortable, if it's an offense that looks like it has more of a pulse than the Bears did last week in Arizona, that's only going to make the outside noise, as the Bears love to continue to refer to the conversation about them as, it's only going to make it grow louder because of what's happening inside the building and their inability to figure out from week to week how to fix their own problems.
By the way, real quick, just they do realize, Courtney, that they control the narrative, right?
Of course they do.
Yeah.
It's just it's a way to, I get kind of annoyed with that, as most people in the media do. Like, we're not causing these problems.
Exactly.
It's our job to talk about it. And even like with Tyreek Stevenson last week afterwards, you're proud of, if you're with the Bears, you're proud of him for handling the week the way that he did, despite leaving practice momentarily on Wednesday, but then, coming back and accepting his role. I mean, I was down there watching him closely, and he was the first guy to dap everybody up coming off the field before he went in for that third series. But then afterwards, still going down to, the media tried to bring me down. I'm paraphrasing here, but he invoked those words. I'm like, God bless. Do we have to do this? Is it really accountability when you throw in the scapegoat? None of this stuff has been created by us. I wish, because I'd be a millionaire if I could control things. As well as at least the credit we're being given that we are controlling this narrative and we're perpetuating it. Right. It's not the case. And all of this right now, when Matt Eberflus says he's not making any changes to the offensive play caller, that the answers can be found looking inward, you better do it. Otherwise, it's only going to get louder, because there are solutions that you could look at elsewhere. And if you're choosing not to go down a certain path because you're so confident that you can find it internally, then you better prove yourself right. Otherwise, that outside noise, as they want to keep calling it, will only get louder.
Back on the field, Courtney, we saw Arizona gash them, and that was with Billings in the game for over half the game. What are they going to do to stop this all of a sudden terrible rush defense without Billings?
Well, it's going to be a combination of guys, I think, that they put in there at nose tackle. We know Zach Pickens had the groin injury earlier, which today he said he tore the first layers, what he said, of his groin when he came back too early in week 2 against Houston, which I was a little surprised just hearing about the rehab of that, how quickly, for all intents and purposes, he was able to get back. Usually a torn groin, depending upon the severity, is going to keep you out more than a couple of weeks, but it'll be him. It'll be Chris Williams. Williams had the sack last week when he was playing, so that's a promising sign. Byron Cowart. It's going to take a lot to replace somebody who was one of your better run stoppers, even for a rushing defense right now that's averaging 5 yards a carry allowed, 131 yards a game. It's not good, but it's going to be a group effort to fill the shoes of somebody who, frankly, is indispensable. There's very few players on this team, and any team that fall into that category. Andrew Billings is that, and the run defense has not been good even when he was in there, but he was changing his game this year, where he had a bigger impact on the quarterback and getting into the backfield than he had in previous seasons. So they're going to have to figure out how to sustain that interior pass rush too, with him not being there.
Courtney, what is your best guess for why there is a lack of chemistry between the quarterback and DJ Moore? And do you believe that DJ's frustration has negatively affected his play?
A couple things about this. Pat and I were just talking about this on the podcast. I wonder on a week-to-week basis, because these excuses, whether valid or not, we're talking about this 10 weeks into the season. DJ Moore had played with 12 other quarterbacks before Caleb, and he had 4,000-yard seasons when guys like Will Greer and P.J. Walker were throwing him the ball. It just doesn't add up. So I wonder, in terms of play calling, are they changing too much on a week-to-week basis that is confusing what I think you should be doing versus what you think I should be doing? And that meaning Caleb and DJ Moore. Because there's just no... you can think about whatever you want about the play where he left the field and had the tweaked ankle, why didn't he come back in? I think a lot of that was a bang-bang situation. It happened so quickly in real time that he might have not realized he could go back in. He was also dealing with an ankle that had just blown up on him. There's a lot of reasons for that. But Caleb missing him on the back when he had the back shoulder throw and DJ's, running vertical, there's no excuse for that 9 weeks into the season. And what I intimated from what Caleb Williams said last week is that, or said yesterday when he said, yeah, we can like laugh and joke and like we're friends and all this stuff. I don't know if they're really paring down the details as much as maybe they had said they were earlier in the year to get him on track for that 105-yard game. Maybe they fell off with that. Maybe it's getting more. No team's like taking DJ out. That's the thing. It's not like there's like cloud coverage constantly over on his side of the field or like somebody shadowing him and like he's a non-factor. They targeted him 9 times. They threw the ball 10 times to Keenan Allen last week. 8 catches total from both of those guys. Something's off. So you have to wonder, is it the plays and the route designs and the concepts themselves that are either too complicated, that they're changing too frequently week to week, or that they're just not grasping? And the just not grasping part would be you have to throw that excuse out the window because he's a veteran receiver. Keenan Allen's a veteran receiver. Cole Kmet's a veteran tight end who's not getting the ball thrown his way nearly enough, and it's maddening to think about. I think a lot of that would fall more on the offensive coordinator and the situation that he's putting these guys in to make sure that they can just get some easy completions to build that confidence up and to start moving the ball down the field at a much more efficient rate than they've done the last couple games.
It's really odd, too, because this offense was described by some of these players as a very easy offense to learn. And that, based on what you just said, Courtney, that doesn't seem to kind of intersect with how they described it as receivers earlier in the year.
Yeah, and I would love to just blame the offensive line for all of this. You know what I mean? They're just making Caleb run around
when you
like
play
crazy.
Like this, there's enough blame to go around everybody.
And so, with a great offensive line, they'd have better chemistry is my assessment of it. I also think I think you're right, Courtney. I think, both you guys mentioned Waldron, and I just using Keenan Allen, I feel like they're definitely misusing him. Like, isn't he supposed to be just third down, give me a down and in and first down? It feels like he's going downfield too much. I'm not covering this like you guys have. It just feels like something's off, and I think that's more on Waldron, my opinion.
Yeah, and I mean, he was always the third down target throughout his career with the Chargers and supposed to be, the guy who can catch passes over the middle of the field. Like, your surefire thing on third down. But it doesn't, like, some of the personnel usage is, I think, still a question mark for this team. Gerald Everett, who had been doing nothing, more or less, the last couple of weeks, why was even one target that went his way? Why is that target not going to Cole Kmet? We had these questions early on in the season, starting from that Tennessee game about the usage and why certain players are in certain situations. Hell, you can even look at it in the Washington game when they got a little too over their skis and handed the ball off to Doug Kramer at the goal line. These are breadcrumbs, and I was talking with the guys about this earlier in the week. I think I mentioned it with Carmen and Yurko. Like, this is giving you like the clues about what the offensive problems are, because you're not seeing the most simple thing: get the ball to your best players. You have so many of them, you don't have the excuse of, the defense just took away our number one guy. Like, look at Minnesota. Minnesota has a clear-cut number one receiver in Justin Jefferson, the best receiver in the NFL. They've also got Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, all these other weapons, yet they still manage to feed Justin Jefferson time and time again. Maybe it's the fact that they haven't really established who the number one receiver is, even though I think we all can look at it and say that should be DJ Moore's role. The role for him last year in a career year, it should be the role for him now. It feels like they've reverted to some of those early season confounding decisions where it's like, why is this guy involved in the game? Why is Travis Homer in on this situation? Why is Gerald Everett being used in this way? Like, there's a lot of it that doesn't make sense. So to bring it back, Jesse, to your point on Keenan Allen, is he being misused? Is he not? It's not like they're not targeting him. He's a very reliable receiver. The way that he can, make his routes all look the same makes it very difficult, the way that he sells it, for defensive backs to cover. So that should be to the advantage of the Bears and to Caleb Williams, knowing that you have somebody who's going to be a security blanket for you. But it hasn't played out that way, and the questions only grow louder about the usage of some of the best playmakers on this team that sometimes feel like they're an afterthought in the game plan.
Courtney, I think it was Ozzie Guillen who once said, good teams win, bad teams meet. There's been a lot of there's been a lot of meeting going on. Again, does it feel like the vibe and the body language of this team that everybody is kind of pulling on the same end of the rope right now?
That's what they're saying internally. Yeah. There's a lot of meetings, and we only hear about them when stuff goes wrong. You don't hear about meetings like, wow, we won the game. We had a great meeting afterwards. Like, nobody cares. We care when we hear what happened last week, where players were coming out outside of meetings to express frustrations over what had happened. And we're in a different era now where everybody athletes can control their own messages because they have podcasts, they have radio spots, they can talk about things much more openly than just being in the confines of the facility and waiting for the media to go up to them. So that's why it became a bigger thing. And then this past week, when you hear about a team meeting that happened on Monday and players not necessarily airing of grievances, but speaking up, this is a veteran team. This isn't a bunch of young guys. This isn't a group that, doesn't have guys who have won things before. I mean, Tremaine Edmonds was on Buffalo for a long time. He won, he's in a relevant winning team there. Of course, Keenan Allen in his career and, TJ Edwards, all of these guys who are veteran voices, who are respected voices on this team, they need to be listened to. Now, the only thing I would say like that, like when I heard that this past week, I initially, you think, okay, well, you hear about players speaking up. Is this a players only meeting? It was not. And they've clarified that on every chance they've gotten. If it ever gets to that point, though, then you're the New Orleans Saints. Then you're looking at a situation where if guys are the ones calling meetings, that usually is spelling the end of something, kind of like a dire move that they have to make. But it hasn't gotten to that point yet. So the vibe right now, I think they're a team that realizes they got smacked in the face really hard in Washington and then got the same treatment last week, which was frankly their own doing. Now you've got 2 weeks of feeling like crap coming out on Mondays after games. Like, this is your one chance to just go and put that all behind you, because there's probably going to be some other Mondays coming up where you're not feeling great just because the competition level you're about to face starting week 11 is brutal. The NFC North is brutal. It's good for the state of football, bad for the state of the Chicago Bears right now, just given some of the things that they have to work through. And if you can keep these guys together, which I don't think there's any sort of fracturing in the locker room. I have not gotten that vibe, but of course, human nature, you risk running that happening if the losses continue to pile up and if you can't just flush this thing once and for all and try to get back in the win column.
Well, before we let you go, Courtney, one of the talking points that has kind of dominated our first 3 days here after the game and now into the fourth day is the coach's job security. Do you have a thought on that before we cut you loose?
Yeah, I know there's a couple things. The podcaster today who talked about it and laid out some salient points just about, the Bears do not want to continue on the cycle of that they've been trying to break. Ryan Poles has talked about it, like breaking cycles is kind of his goal here in Chicago. You can't make a determination on Matt Eberflus at week 9 when they haven't played a single division opponent, so I don't buy into any of that. Whether you call that reporting or not, I just think that, based on what we heard, that he's coming back next year, come hell or high water, no matter what. You cannot make that determination at week 9. But also beyond that, there's a very important thing outside of win and loss record these next couple of games, the back end of the season, that you have to determine. If Caleb Williams is not where you expected him to be or expect him to be come the end of week 18, then you risk ruining his development, and they've got to make sure that they've got the right coaches in place to do that, because this can't be a throwaway year.
Nope.
We all know that. Yep. I know that they treated Justin Fields, not they necessarily, the old regime, not Ryan Poles or whatever, but the last regime treated Justin Fields' rookie season like it didn't matter, and that was a big problem, which also factors into you can't break your quarterback before he's gotten broken in to life in the NFL. What I mean by that, whatever you have to do to protect him, because the hits, I promise you, we have seen it. They will break his confidence. I know that Caleb kind of laughed when I mentioned that part of the question that I asked him yesterday. It's because we've seen it happen. No matter how good you are, no matter how much hero ball you can play, and how effective you've been in your past at getting out of jams, the more you get hit, the more gun-shy you will get. We saw it happen with Justin Fields, and then you start seeing ghosts. That is what the Bears have to do here with their coach, starting with their coaching staff, the final 9 games of the season, to make sure that not only do they not waste Caleb Williams' rookie season, but that their coaching staff can show them that they can make the right adjustments to make sure that they don't do that and don't put him in a worse situation. So next year becomes the year of undoing with potentially a new offensive staff and a new offense, which that's perpetuating the cycle that they have been trying to get away from now for a while.
Amen.
Courtney, thank you so much. Enjoy the weekend and the game.
Thanks,
Appreciate
Courtney.
it.
Thank you, guys. Take care.